Hello, and welcome to the Wayfinders podcast. Let's go. Well, in this episode of Wayfinders, we will meet Ed Gawne. Ed moved from London, the UK, to Shanghai, back to London, back to Shanghai, before settling in the province of Jiangxi in a town called Wuyuan to open a heritage hotel. But that wasn't all, and it wasn't enough for Ed, his wife, Selina, and their 2 children. They also built another hotel nearby. So yes, 2 hotels in rural China. Wow. That's the journey we're going to go on today and story we will hear about in this episode. Some of the themes and topics we'll hear about are things like the role of anti-role models to Ed and his decisions. And we'll meet a person called John. And by the way, that's not his real name.
And my manager then gave me a pep talk and said, if you really get your head down, you could be like John over there. You could be the new John. I was like, I don't want to be John.
We'll hear about the impact of a misheard conversation with a French teacher. We'll hear about what it means to live an interesting...
Yeah, I wanted something interesting, and definitely coming to China looking for an interesting life. That's what I found. And it's not always easy.
We'll hear about the importance of having a partner when doing something massively adventurous and completely off the beaten track in a new country. And yes, we'll hear about what it's like to be the Basil Fawlty of China.
If I'm feeling Basil Fawlty, I will say to the dad in front of his wife and kids, surely you can do this, can't you? Are you not capable of doing this?
And Ed and myself will talk in quite a bit of detail about our respective experiences in rural China. Ed as a hotelier and myself as an anthropologist researching organic farming. So let's go. Okay, so being new at this, I had a problem with my microphone recording this podcast with Ed. There was a crackling sound like the cord was loose or something like that. Anyway, it's all fixed. The editing has taken care of most of the difficult and annoying sounds, but sometimes once or twice it'll be a bit muffled and may sound a little bit strange. Anyway, back to the podcast. Ed Gawne, welcome to the Wayfinders podcast. How are you?
Hi Sasha, I'm very good. Lovely to see you again after quite a few many years.
Very cool. Now, our listeners know that you're a Brit who has set up some amazing hotels in China, in the province of Jiangxi. But before we unpack what it's like to be the Basil Fawlty of the hinterland, Ed, could you give us an introduction? Who is Ed Gawne? Where are you from? What have you been doing in your life? How did you end up in China with 2 hotels and a family?
So there's plenty to talk about there. Stop me if I'm waffling. So I'm from the outskirts of London. I went to school there, university, all that stuff. I'm British. I worked in market research. I'm straight out of the gates at university. So that was my grad scheme, and that seemed like a very sensible grown-up job, and it was fairly interesting. Big client, difficult questions in London. Pints of beer on a Friday night, and fun and interesting times. But age 25, I think I've been doing it for 3, maybe 4 years, and I remember. I don't know. I was noodling around looking at other opportunities, and my manager then gave me a pep talk and said, if you really get your head down, you could be like John over there. You could be the new John. And I remember looking at John thinking, John had bloodshot red eyes. He was always tired. He was a junior manager, and he'd just bought this stupidly large mortgage for a 2-bed flat in a crappy part of London he hated. I was like, I don't want to be John. That's not where I want to be. So I ran away to the other side of the world, really. So Millward Brown, the company, had this great thing called Passport Abroad, which gave me an opportunity to go and work in China for a bit with you, Sasha. It's
a pretty compelling image you've created there about John. I'm presuming we're protecting the innocent here. It's very compelling, but also it sounds incredibly depressing as well. Yeah. Have I got that right, Ed?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. I bet I'm going to guess most people don't dream of a career in market research, but it's sort of a reasonably grown-up job, and pays the bills, and it's fairly interesting. But then yeah, maybe you get to that point when it's mortgage time, and then you have to kind of commit to that path the next 30 years of your life. And I don't know, what seems like a fun, interesting thing to do at the beginning of your career takes on more weight when you have to commit the rest of your life to that path. And so yeah, that certainly that rattled my cage a bit, let's say.
So when you came on the passport abroad, that was in 2011. Oh, yeah, that was 2011. Were you already thinking that, this is a way for me to kind of keep going with what I'm doing, but also explore other opportunities? Is that kind of where your head was at that time?
Yeah, and I think I wanted I always thought I wanted an interesting life. I famously, in my French GCSE oral exam, I told my teacher I wanted to be content, which means sort of happy and interested and fulfilled, content, and he misheard it as accountant, and he accountant, and he took me off on the wrong path, all about maths and things, and but yeah, I wanted something interesting, and definitely coming to China looking for an interesting life. That's what I found, and it's not always easy, as you know, but it's interesting. One thing that definitely helped was being part of that big corporate system to make a horizontal move over to China. I get young people asking me kind of, how could I go and do something like that? And straight out of the gates from university, I think is a bad idea. Sort of get yourself some experience, get your head down first, make yourself slightly more valuable, ideally qualified in something, and then move abroad.
Yeah. Yeah. So this thing around interesting life, I reckon we'll come back to it, and I'll ask you more about that, because it's in some of the other people I've been speaking to who have also moved around the world. They talk about this, and actually they use this word a lot. Interesting. It's a way to become interesting and expose themselves to all kinds of stuff. Now, China is, you're biting off a lot.
It was highlighted to me. I'd have a better chance being accepted if I went from a very Western country to a very, how to put it, very, very Eastern, very different country.
Yeah.
Going from a developed market to a developing market. For example, the New York office was not very interested in people from the London office. They wanted people from something completely different, and that was the idea to shake things up a bit.
Yeah. And is there any China in your family? Any interest in China? Any people who have been to China before? Was China spoken about at the dinner table, or was it something completely new for you and your family, China as a country to go and visit and live in?
It wasn't completely new. My parents had been on a trip, I don't know, 7-8 years beforehand, and they really loved it. And they came back with the message that China is a place on the move, and it's not what we had seen in the press. And skyscrapers are leaping out of the dust, and that's where the future is. So they'd kind of internalized quite a positive message about China, along with the fact it's bonkers, it's difficult, it's scary, but then it was a place. It was a country that was going places.
So you had that sense coming in, a bit of that sense coming in 2011, Ed. Is that right?
I wonder, that was almost like, I hate this phrase, peak China, but something in that kind of era. It was just after the Olympics. It was just after, let's say, the 2008 financial crash, and there was definitely a sense that the center of gravity was moving east in the world in terms of economic and cultural growth for the future. China is obviously an increasingly important place. It can be challenging reconciling that big news story with what you find kind of on the ground dealing with people. When people, I don't know, it's a really frustrating place to live and work, as you know, and you hear this is the future and the Chinese are taking over, but you'll just spend hours talking with someone about how to, I don't know, print a piece of paper or something. This is insane.
Tell us about your first months, your first year in. Well, hang on. When you came here, you didn't move permanently. You came for a period, then you went back to Britain, then you came back, and then you were permanent. Walk us through this journey, going back, and then deciding to come back.
So yeah, I did 5 months at Millbrown, Shanghai, and yeah, I really liked it. I thought that thing I was looking for was something that was interesting. It was different to what poor old John had in his little 2-bed apartment in South London. I definitely found that in terms of Work was a little bit bonkers. It was challenging, but it was obviously had a lot of opportunity and progress, and then especially sort of life outside work. It was really I enjoyed learning Chinese, and so then I got flown back to London at the end. That was the gig from central office. That was the diktat that I was to go and share all these things I'd learned about China with the London office. And as you can imagine, sort of, I don't know, operationally, there's not a huge amount to be told, and they weren't running any China projects there. And I think I did one presentation about things in China, and it took like 4 months for it to be scheduled in. Okay.
Right.
So after my scheduled time, I had to be back. It was back to the same quandary. Poor old John was still there in the corner, hacking away on his keyboard and doing lots of this and getting a 2-hour bus in every day. And,
wow.
I was still mortgage and long-term partner free. Someone said to me something that stuck. It was someone a few years above me in London had gone to Singapore and stayed there and was in London on a work trip and said, it's not the things you try that don't work out in life that you will regret. It's the things you never have the guts to try. And I thought that was a really good message for just go, just do it, you know. Age 29 3/4, I downed tools and quit from Millward Brown, and then sort of heading off my quarter life crisis. I liked my life perhaps in China more than London. And so I thought if I want to do something interesting in China, I should get better at Chinese. And I'd been a good little boy. I'd been saving my pennies as I went. Funny story. You might be culpable for some of this. Selina's mother was really concerned about the working hours Selina was doing. Working in any marketing agency in Shanghai can be quite unforgiving with working hours. And there's a little bit of Chinese work culture. The client says on Friday at 6 p.m, I might want this in the morning. And so, everyone's Friday night is cancelled. So she invented a cock and bull story that she had liver cancer so that Selina would quit and go back to Jiangxi, her home, to take care of her. And
this rings a bell. Yeah, this rings a bell. It doesn't ring a strong bell because, Ed, during my time running a team in Millward Brown, Shanghai, I had a lot of stories of why people were leaving. But, it does ring a bell. I do remember Selina having to leave at short notice. This is really familiar.
Selina was in tears. She thought this was true.
Her mum. Selina wasn't in on it.
Yeah, because she was so worried about Selina's working hours.
Got it.
And her whole family.
I didn't realize. Okay.
So her mum had some treatment. I'm doing air quotes there. And then Selina went back and they went traveling, to try and pep her spirits. And I don't know, they're going to be their last holiday together.
Well, it's not the first time that parents have been involved in the employment of their children. I mean, there's many stories of parents coming to their children's annual review. And actually, it happened to me once as well, also in the team. And she wasn't, she had a few improvement areas, you could say, but, everything was normal. And her mum came to the annual review and it didn't go very well, Ed. Because her mum wouldn't listen to anything.
Did you let her in the room? You wouldn't just want to say, I'm sorry, this is not your annual review.
It's hard to stop a Chinese mother coming through the door when they want to.
It's
put it that way. So she sat in on that review. But I've got to say, I say this very genuinely. Good on Selina's mum for being massively creative to ensure her daughter was, work-life balance.
Yeah. So Selina came back to Shanghai, but she wasn't working because she'd quit. And she did actually work. She worked for Kellogg's with some success for a bit. But I'd said to her, let's go and do something more interesting. I want to learn Chinese. And I had floated these ideas of romantic Chinese city ideas I had. Like, what about like Harbin, or could we go to, I don't know, like maybe Dali, or I was saying all sorts of bonkers places to her that I had a romantic idea about for me to learn Chinese full time. And she sort of heard each one of these. You say to a Chinese woman who's landed in tier 1 Shanghai, I want to move to lower tier somewhere because foreigners like it. They sort of roll their eyes at you. And she said, well, okay, let's make a deal. We could go to Nanchang because that's where her family are from. She could spend more time with her family. I could get to know them. We could live on the cheap there. So off we went, and I studied for a year at Nanchang Dashi, Nanchang University, studying Mandarin.
And sorry, Ed, and where is Nanchang, and in relation to, like, what province, and in relation to Shanghai?
So this is the hardest question that I have to answer regularly because no one's heard of Nanchang or Jiangxi or Wuyuan. So I normally say Nanchang is the capital of Jiangxi province, which is about 50, 60 million people. It's roughly the size of England, bigger landmass, slightly more people. Ballpark halfway between Shanghai and Hong Kong as the crow flies. If the crow got a bit past.
South of Shanghai.
Yeah, bit inland, bit south.
Yeah.
Okay. But that was really nice. I recommend to anyone who's having a tough time in a stressful career, just take a year out, go to university, get a bicycle.
Yeah.
That was lovely. Pedaling about on a campus. I had fierce Chinese teachers who were 22, 23 years old, who would sort of shout at me, but I was older than them, and I just thought, well, I'm just not going to do that, I'm afraid, and that was fine. I studied quite well, not as hard as they wanted. Full-time student for a year. The other students were mostly from Indonesia, and they had a tie-in with Perm, a city in Russia. So lots of students from there, and we all got on really well. Very fun time. But so when that ended, I had already lined up the next thing, which was the hotel. So I was traveling around Jiangxi with Selina, and I think we'd had this idea of getting a little house and doing a little Airbnb. We'd done some Airbnb in Shanghai. Selina is a young Chinese woman, which means she's a rapacious capitalist, interested in gold, buying houses, buying cars, all those other great symbols of Marxist-Leninism. I had a romantic idea when we go on holiday. When you go to a nice little place in the countryside. I went somewhere in Guilin with my family, my parents and Selina. Old farmhouse, restored, white wine on the door. But then in the morning, Selina was knocking on doors saying, is this your house? And then we went on a trip to Wuyuan, which is where we now have our hotel. So again, I'd had some beers with my friend who was there. Oh, we could do this. This would be so fun. The light of a new dawn breaks on the real world. Again, I caught Selina knocking on old people's doors, asking if she could take their house off them. She was looking at where the local government were. And so as we talked about it, the idea kind of grew and grew into making a little Airbnb. And then we went back the next time, like 2 weeks later, in the car, and we were knocking on government offices.
Yeah.
And that's when things we found the right village party secretary, mayor, in the right place. And then he said, here's a place. And that's how we kind of got started. We were off. Yeah, so we found the party secretary, and he said, Yoda, and he took us. Quite a young guy, cigarettes absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
He took us into this creaking, old house.
So I've rented a few houses in China. I haven't bought one. And I know when you rent a property in China, there's all kinds of documents and things that you have to sign. They have to verify your ID and all kinds of stuff. So I was curious about the bureaucratic paperwork, if you like, that Ed and Selina would have to go through in purchasing a very old property in the Chinese countryside. Would you say?
I mean, there may have been paperwork at some point. There were things like there was a traditional family tree, which was off in Hangzhou. But I mean, that kind of stuff had mostly been destroyed and burnt in the revolution, the Cultural Revolution. So it was A, not really a legal document, and B, it was almost kind of like I think they're a bit nervous. If they know we've got this, will we be put in shackles in the street, and will it be destroyed? Even though that was decades ago, there was still that kind of idea hanging over them. So unclear ownership structure for sure.
And it's an old building, correct, Ed? Like it's a dynastic. How old is the building?
So we think about 300 years. For the reasons I just said, it's all a bit unclear.
So Qing dynasty.
Early Qing. So a lot of the features are kind of like more Ming features in terms of the heavy square, thick lines, quite minimal floral carving. But it's not like at the end of the Ming dynasty they rang a bell and said, right guys, here's a new design protocol. It slowly bled and flowed. So
Yeah.
when that mayor showed us round, he knew we were in the market for a guest house, and older is better. So he
Mm.
told us, oh, this is like 900 years old. Don't stop, you know. We had a history professor who we found to look around it with us, and our wood carpenter, restorer, artisan. He gave his best guess based on looking at it. So we think about 300 years old. And it's
Wow.
layered. So different. The oldest
Yeah.
part of the house is the centre. There are tea merchants who bought and sold tea. Obviously, business was good. We think about 150 years later, so sort of mid to late Qing, they expanded the house into really just kind of grand, elaborate halls. There's not much living area there. There's a few extra rooms.
Sounds amazing. So in the space of, so this is 2015 now?
Yeah, 2015.
So in the space of 4 years, you've gone from sitting in London, market research office, depressed out of your brains from John.
Yeah.
You know, don't want to be John. You've gone, you've been inspired to be interesting. And we spoke about what that is. You went on a passport abroad to Shanghai for 5 months, had a great time, went back for half a year, whatever it was, came back, met your future wife, spent a year learning Chinese formally at a university, and bought a hotel in the countryside in Jiangxi.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, there were quite a few steps in that process where I was thinking, like, I don't know if I can swear on your podcast, but just
you can go for it.
Just fuck. You know what? This is a few key points. Like, I can remember everything's fun and games, you know, when you're looking around an interesting old building, but when it's time to get to hand over money, so there was a fair bit of beg, steal, borrow from family and friends. There was even more bank debt.
Is that bank in China or in the UK?
In China.
Got it. Yeah.
And you know, certainly back then, credit was a little bit loosey goosey. So we managed to take in quite a lot. I had my little bit of savings. That just went like a fart in the wind straight away. And you know, things like that. As soon as that just off that goes, you kind of think, oh wow, this is real.
Yeah, this is real. Yeah.
I remember the day the builders moved in, and suddenly there were machines, people, walls coming down. That felt very real and scary. First guests arriving. And all of these moments, I was thinking, like, God, what have I got myself into? But I, in a good way, you know, it was the right amount of being stretched and pushed to something new. And definitely having a partner is a good thing. Doing it by yourself is scary, but having someone with you who's just in the trenches with you, and because it is quite a bonkers, unique thing, the pitfalls and pressures are difficult for outsiders to understand and relate to. So to go through it all with someone is really important, I think.
Well, I must say, Ed, the photos, I remember seeing a photo of you and Selina. I think it was taken probably maybe the day when you bought the property. So before it was renovated, there's a photo of you and Selina, and you're sitting on the front steps, I think. Do you know the photo I'm talking about? And you look as happy as a pig in shit. So I think that everyone watching what you and Selina were doing could absolutely see that this is exactly where you needed to be, doing exactly what you need to be doing. It was brilliant. So we left you in the Chinese countryside in Wuyuan, in Jiangxi. Now, I'm really keen, Ed, to explore the Chinese countryside with you, because we both have quite rich but different experiences in rural China. So yourself as a hotelier, and myself as an academic anthropologist doing field work. So let me start with a brutal question. The perception of rural China to a lot of people is things like it's backward. The peasants are all subsistence farmers. It's poor. It's dirty. It's not like the countryside in Japan or in Britain or Australia. You know, it's a really different world that you're stepping into in the countryside. At the same time, many Chinese people feel that it's also got something pure and authentic about the Chinese culture and the Chinese nation. Food is medicine. They're retreating to the idyllic mountains and streams and so on. So it's got these contrasting kind of narrative. Help us navigate this topic. Let's start by asking, what's been your experiences in the countryside? Is it what did you expect? Did you have any expectations moving there?
My benchmark was my parents retired to the French countryside about 10, 15 years before I did this. So northern France, Normandy, so it's quite a culture clash. I'd watched them go through that journey of like drinking with the mayor, persuading him to let them take on a house, inviting all the neighbours over one by one, ingratiating themselves in the community, and the frustrations of language and that kind of thing.
Yeah, right. I would never have kind of made that connection, actually, that moving to some parts of continental Europe would be kind of analogous in some ways to rural China. It's really insightful.
But yeah, there's definitely it's a tightly knit community. You need permission from the mayor to buy a house in every village, so you have to wine and dine the mayor. And he enjoyed giving my parents intestines cooked in blood to see how they would handle that.
Yeah, this does sound like rural China.
Yeah,
doesn't it? Yeah, it's like a spitting image.
Yeah, Dad was a vet. He's sadly no longer with us, but he asked for a goose for Christmas from a local goose farmer, and he gave him a live quacking goose as like a joke. You stupid English, you do not know what to do with the goose. Because he was a vet, he had excellent animal kung fu and sort of broke its neck in front of him.
And what about you guys in China?
At the beginning, I think we pretended I did like smoking cigarettes, which I don't. And quickly we gave up on that. And then I started just giving out cigarettes. And then they said, this is a bit weird. You're giving them out and not smoking them with us. So it's not as alien as some of the stories say. Some people like to paint it as, I think especially was the urban Chinese, or some of them. Everyone has a distorted picture of the Chinese countryside. It's mysterious, it's closed off. But urban Chinese have this idea that the people in the countryside are just, like you said, almost savages from outer space. Whereas the Western idea is that it's more romantic, but still impenetrable.
Yeah, well, my exposure to Chinese countryside was kind of accompanying urban Chinese going there to set up their organic farms and so on. And I found that they all professed to wanting to immerse themselves in rural China and traditional China, to get rid of the diseases of the city and modernity and whatnot. But they all did everything they could not to interact with rural Chinese. So, for example, they would, some of them would pretend to be rural. So they would watch the farmers around them, and then they would go, okay, this guy, he collects stuff. He just collects stuff. I'm going to collect stuff, because that's what they do here. And this one farmer, he collected so much stuff. Like he became this hoarder, and he had to rent additional properties to kind of keep all the stuff he was hoarding. Another guy, he thought that because he had all these people coming to his farm from the city for like day trips, nongjiale, these kind of excursions with their kids and whatnot. And so he said, and he had a lot of rural staff on his farm, and he was like, I need to make these rural Chinese a bit more urban, so they can interact appropriately with my guests. So he would teach them how to speak, how to drink, how to drink wine, red wine, not baijiu. Like nobody was being themselves apart from the locals, who kind of looked upon what was going on with a bit of like curiosity and confusion, actually. Yeah, they were baffled. But all the urban people felt that there was something here that they could discover that they couldn't get in the city. Yeah. Does that resonate with your experiences?
It does. My sample set is slightly different to you because I have guests coming for 2 to 3 nights. And so they are less committed to the Chinese countryside. They want to go and have a look, have a jolly, and then on the train go back. Whereas it sounds like people you were with were, really countryside enthusiasts, so more open to positive stories.
But the people visiting, they're coming for what, to get away, to have a break, or get away from the city, or
2 to 3 nights typically, flapping and the squawking when there's an insect in their bedroom. We've had people ask for refunds, and you have to come practice, and it's like there's an insect in your room. Like, this happens,
Right.
I mean, let alone the time we had a cobra on one of the stairs.
So the cobra could be scary anywhere, but insects in the room. So guests legitimately straight-faced go, "给我退钱."
Yeah, I mean that's a rarity, but very common is squawking. You need to come catch this bug.
Right.
And if I'm feeling Basil faulty,
what do you do?
I'll go in. Well, I get a cup and paper and I try and get it. We have quite tall ceilings, which makes it tough. If I'm feeling Basil faulty, I will say to the dad in front of his wife and kids, "Surely you can do this, can't you? Are you not capable of doing this?" But then they like your miens, and then I get in trouble, that kind of thing. They lose face.
Mm. So there's been a lot written about the Chinese consumer and consumerism in China. Deborah Davies, who is an excellent scholar from the US, wrote all about the changing relationships that Chinese people have from what she called horizontal with the state to vertical with each other. So buyers and sellers in the market. There's a scholar called Jiwei Ci who writes about the hedonism and buying exuberance that you see in consumer culture today in China. And he actually linked it back to Maoism. Joe Stubwell made the observation of all these books coming out, numbers. So 400 million consumers was what Karl Kroh wrote about in the 1930s and 40s in China. 1 billion customers is Tom Doctorow's book, Tom Doctorow ran JWT in China for many, many years. I think the two key things to keep in mind on this topic is, on the one hand, deference. So consumers wanting deference extended to them. And on the other hand, face. And so let's listen to what Ed has to say about the consumers that he encounters as a hotelier in the countryside.
So I think also Chinese consumers are bad at choosing things. So Chinese tourists are bad at choosing what they want. They will just see an advert for this is the place in Jiangxi to go. Well, I'm in Jiangxi, well, I will go there. And I want to say to them, like, do you like the countryside? Are you interested in hiking in trees? And, oh God, no, I don't like that at all. Well, why are you here? I said, well, because this is the place that everyone goes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say one of my takeaways from Noah Brown is that Chinese consumers are quite bad at brand choice. Something like beer, I was in the beer category, and it was really hard asking people what beer they wanted because a lot of people didn't choose. Someone else chose at the table 40 bottles of beer and then have at it. Yeah. People don't have that kind of individual, I am me and I like this brand and this is my choice. And I think I certainly see that in people coming to the countryside for a holiday. Fear of being ripped off. I think for Chinese, being an outsider in a different community is really nerve-wracking.
Yeah, very insightful. Yeah. I mean, the analogy that I saw in what I was doing was around organic food. So the average urban family, the vegetables I get at the wet market, I've got to wash it for an hour to get rid of the pesticides. So yes, organic food is great. I'm going to go and get me some of that. And to make sure that it's coming from a good source, they'll go and visit the farm and do a tour. And it's like the first time you taste wine and they pour it for you, and they wait for you to to pass judgment to keep pouring it. And you're like, it tastes like wine to me. Like, great. So they go to this farm and they go, yep, straight. There's fields of straight rows of something sticking out of it, so it must be good. And then they look at a cucumber or a carrot, and it looks really different to to chemical farming produce. It's not straight. The color's not right. It's not smooth. It's dirty, and so on. And so all the farmers, they had to basically curate organic produce to make sure it met this kind of like rustic appearance, but not too rustic, but just right. To the point where they would they would wash the rice to get rid of the chaff just enough, and they would have like a color palette. It's like, painting a color palette to make sure the color was just right.
Yeah.
So nothing to do with nutrition or anything. It was all about the aesthetics. How do you navigate that tightrope between the deference they expect versus the reality that it is? And yeah, what is some of your rules of thumb or guidelines that you use to keep people happy? Yeah, keep people happy.
I mean, so one thing is, in my experience, the cultural gap between urban Chinese and rural Chinese is greater than I've seen in any other country. Which I find really weird, is everyone was rural Chinese 2 generations ago. So how quickly they have changed and forgotten all this. I mean, in urban China, no one knows how to change a plug on their light when it goes. I wonder how many people call the building manager when a light bulb goes. I've seen it plenty of times. Whereas in rural China, everyone repairs everything themselves. It's difficult to find work tiling a roof or painting a house because everyone does it themselves. And they do a crazy job. And, everything's held together with duct tape and WD-40 and sort of staplers. But I like it. It's really refreshing compared to urban China, how these people do things themselves. And
very resourceful, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that does mean when we have a leak in our roof and we try and pay someone to fix it, some of the solutions that come out can be a bit frustrating. And I will push back, and Selina will say, no, don't.
Let me just get the final questions that I want to get. Someone came to you and said, I want to do something in China. It's not a corporate job, not necessarily a hotel, but it's something out in the countryside, I want to open a restaurant, or maybe it's a boutique hotel, or I want to buy some property and do it up, or anything like that. What advice would you give them? What do they need to think about to be successful?
Yeah, so everyone always says this, local partner, just because there's so many things that as a foreigner you just don't understand the way that things work. And, it's worth paying heed to the number of foreigners who've come and tried and even just can't get it off the ground. That there is no estate agent you go to that will show you different available restaurant slots. You need to hobnob and talk with local villagers and government officials. And if your Chinese and cultural awareness is good enough for that, great, but that's unlikely.
Have you seen initiatives fail?
Yeah.
Okay.
I spoke to an American guy who does a business like this in Jiangxi, and he said, number one rule, don't do business in the Chinese countryside. But then he said, if you must, just stock up on whiskey and wine because you'll need it
for your relationships, not for yourself, correct?
For stress.
Well, that seems an unusual place to end the podcast, but actually, Ed and myself were talking for about 2 hours, and we never actually wrapped up the conversation. Close to midnight, we kind of, oh dear, time's up. Catch you later, and ended the call. So with all the other material I have recorded from our excellent conversation, I will no doubt revisit the material and launch a part 2 of Ed Gawne and Selina and their adventures in the Chinese countryside. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Wayfinders. I hope you found it interesting. This is a new initiative for me, making a podcast, and I'd love to hear your feedback. You may have some feedback on the format and quality of the podcast itself, or you may wish to recommend a guest that you'd like to hear from. I welcome that and more. You can write to me directly on sashacody@me.com. SACHACODY@me.com. I hope you can join and listen to the next episode of Wayfinders, which will be released in about 2 weeks. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.